think just people are becoming more and more familiar with this and it's in the news more. It's going to happen. I really feel that we are going to be able to expand our laws. To the best of my knowledge, A Better Exit is the only organization in the entire United States that is trying to expand the current medical aid and dying laws. So we're sort of like solo out there trying to blaze a trail.
Hi, I'm Daniel Zimberoff, and this is the Dine with Dignity podcast. We're on episode 3, so we're off and running. And today's guest is a founder of A Better Exit, Christie Golemb. I believe, Christie, you're out in San Diego. Is that correct, where we're catching you from today?
Correct.
Great. Well, we know each other from the Final Exit Network and a webcast that we did earlier this year on the Switzerland option. I know we both have that as a shared experience. I believe your mother and my father. That's probably the event, but I just want to ask you a little bit about yourself and then how you got into the end-of-life choice space.
Well, let me see. So I grew up, my parents always laughed. And growing up, they'd say, oh, when I get old, I don't want to grow old. I'm going to do like the Indians and I'm going to walk off into the blizzard and just die. And, we all laugh because we're like, oh, what are they talking about? So then my dad got cancer before California had a medical aid and dying law. And I was told that he was going to shoot himself when he didn't want to continue down that trajectory anymore. And that was unacceptable to me. That's violent. I didn't want to have to pick up the mess. What if he wasn't successful? So to make a long story short, we were able to figure out of the medications he was taking, which ones he could compile, stockpile them for about 6 months or more, and then he would be able to just OD on his drugs. So when he decided that he'd had enough, my mother was the 24/7 caretaker. He didn't want to put her through that anymore. He took her to dinner. My mom checked into a hotel so that nobody could accuse her of aiding him. And he sat down at the dining room table with a bottle of Courvoisier and his bottle of pills.
How
And
old was he, Christy?
oh God, 74 maybe. Um, and the next morning, my mom and I found him under the table. Great, dialed 911. The thing that sticks in my mind is I was very adamant with the police that my mother wasn't there. And the comment that they made was, Christy, we're not even worried about your mother. Do you know how often elderly people with diseases commit suicide? This isn't a big deal. And I was like, what? Well, I was a single mom with 2 young kids. I just went back to living my life.
Yeah.
Then if we fast forward to my mother, she got Alzheimer's and was doing really well until so she was diagnosed in 2017. So she did great, was still living on her own in a retirement community. And in 2021, she fell and broke her collarbone. And then she was admitted to acute nursing, whatever it's really called. And she ended up having Alzheimer's on her medical records because I was yelling Alzheimer's so that the hospital would talk to me. So in the skilled nursing facility, everybody would talk to me. What I did not realize was that her retirement community had a rule that if you're diagnosed with any type of dementia, the only way you're allowed back or on the premise is to be in their lockdown memory care unit.
No.
So I didn't know what else to do. I let her go back into the lockdown memory care unit because she had lived there for 10 years. She walked 6 miles a day in the neighborhood. They promised me that they would end up letting her walk, which didn't work out. Had to hire nurses and myself to walk her. But what ended up happening is one day she pulled aside a nurse and asked, where are those little white pills? She was thinking of the pills my dad had taken. She was put on suicide watch. And when I got the call, I knew exactly what happened. And So I spent the day down there, and mom and I had a good talk. And she's like, Christy, I'm done. And I didn't really blame her because she was already in a lockdown memory care center. She didn't want to come live at my house. I didn't know what else to do. And, what do you do when you're faced with that situation? I had no idea. Um, I vaguely remembered that there was something called the Hemlock Society of San Diego. So I looked them up on the internet and talked to them a little bit. And they were like, the only legal thing is voluntary stopping eating and drinking. And my mother did not want to have anything to do with that. But they
Now, was
sent
this
me
before? Sorry to interrupt. This was before California passed its end of life choice or options?
no. So California's, as every other jurisdiction in the United States, to qualify for medical aid in dying, the big caveat is that you have to have two physicians say that you have less than 6 months to live. Well, my mother had Alzheimer's. The only medication she was on was Alzheimer's medication.
Right,
You then have to have capacity, which she could have passed for capacity, but she didn't have less than 6 months to live. So
right.
she
That
didn't qualify.
that was similar to my dad, though he didn't live in a state that had it. With Parkinson's, there's no expiration date, right?
It
Unfortunately,
doesn't do you any good.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, so they sent me two videos on voluntary stopping and drinking from past programs that they'd done. And there was a third video program snuck in between these two, which they told me not to watch, but I was, it was the pandemic. I was just there with a glass of wine watching it. And it was this gentleman talking about going to Switzerland and how US citizens could go to Switzerland. And I guess I'll just sort of backtrack. I had checked into Switzerland for my father. And at that point, all my inquiries said you had to be a resident of Switzerland. So I wasn't even thinking Switzerland for my mom. And then Colin Brewer, who was the presenter, mentioned Switzerland, mentioned that Pegasus had the least amount of paperwork of all the companies. And I just went for it. I was like, Mom, I think I found the answer. And I just, spent days researching, and she was so excited. So I signed up with Pegasus. Together, we, answered all their questions. And, you know, I guess I'm not really supposed to have done this, but I did all the important questions.
Yeah, and how
um,
was she? Sounds like she was fully on board from the beginning.
she was so excited from the beginning.
She was
Pegasus,
ready to go.
she was ready to go. There was no future for her. I mean, she was already in a lockdown center. And I had tried to think about, okay, well, where else, if she doesn't want to live with me and be a burden on me, where else can I send her? The other places that were close enough for me to drive to every day, every other day, were not good places for her to walk. And, you know, especially with an elderly person, she was 87 at the time. With dementia, I needed to make sure it was a secure area if she was going to walk, especially walk by herself. So I didn't really see anything. And I should probably say her mother had Alzheimer's. All her uncles had Alzheimer's. I'm sort of waiting for myself to get
Oh
Alzheimer's.
no.
Um, so she'd seen what happens. It wasn't an unknown to her, if you will. Um, so she did stuff like told about her childhood and her marriage and stuff like that. And I did sort of have to laugh because it was so wrong. But it didn't make any difference. It was like, that still says a great story. She's still helping me on this. Um, with the internet, it was so easy to get the documentation that Pegasus needed. Uh, Her doctor, we even went and asked her doctor. Like, I took her into her neurologist and said, Mom's done. She's in the lockdown memory care center right now. I don't know what else to do with her. We're going to go to Switzerland and she's going to die in Switzerland, voluntary assisted death. And I was just hoping he would say, oh, well, she doesn't have to do that. I can help her do that.
Right.
Unfortunately, that didn't happen,
Hmm.
but it did go in her medical records, the
Okay.
summary. So, the people in Switzerland knew, yeah, she's talked to her doctor about this. Which is not necessary for anybody like listening. You don't have to have that.
Right.
Um, but yeah, she was ready. And she decided she wanted one last summer in San Diego because summers in San Diego are pretty amazing.
I think
But
all year round in San Diego is pretty amazing, but especially summer.
yeah, well, right now we've got May gray, and that's why I have a sweater on, and June gloom. So come any other months, and
Yep.
it's great.
Yep.
um, but my sisters don't live in San Diego, so they rarely saw my mom, and they were on board because I had told them what was happening, but they wanted to hear it from herself. Like they didn't just want to hear it via me. So they both flew out in June, and they were appalled by how much she had declined. And they were like, Christy, we don't think she's going to make it till October. And my one sister's a teacher, so we were a little limited, like, okay, let's do this after school gets out. Um, so I contacted Pegasus and just said, hey, can we move up the date any day after the 20th or 15th of July, something like that. And all in my mind, it was all I needed to do was make an airline reservation. Like, that was it. And so we had 12 days notice from Pegasus. And that was fine. Like I made the reservations. Um, I made round trip tickets for her as well. Uh, During all of this, I didn't tell anybody. And that's the big difference between your story and my story, or your dad
Yeah.
and my mom. Um, I didn't know anybody who had done this. I was still like, oh my gosh, is this really real? I did not want her retirement community to stop her.
Sure.
Um,
Stigmatizer and yeah.
yeah. And then if we went to Switzerland and she wasn't able to do it, if she changed her mind, I wanted her to be able to come back exactly like what you said, with no stigmatization. And just, I told people I was taking her to Boston. I wanted her to be able to just jump back into her life. She tried, didn't work out. Oh, well.
Yeah. Well, even with my dad, I mean, he only told family and a few close friends, at the assisted living he was at, nothing. We were just going on. We didn't lie, say vacation. We just said, we're going overseas. But yeah, he kept it pretty close to the vest too. Not so much because he thought he might come back, but he didn't want to put, in his words, the burden on other people. It makes an awkward conversation. Just the most important people in his life is the people that he shared it with.
And I do know of at least one situation now because I get contacted by people who want to go to Switzerland or have questions about Switzerland all the time. So one of these people that I met after the fact, the daughter that took her mother, um, that retirement community knew about it, and they did call Adult Protective Services.
Oh, no. Huh.
Yes. So, our parents weren't crazy to keep it
Yeah.
close to their chest. I mean,
Yeah.
um, and I had told my mom not to tell anybody. She ended up telling one of the nurses. I found out after the fact, but I don't know how much because he just said, Christy, I knew you were going to Switzerland, but I don't know if he knew
Really what
why.
that meant. Yeah. Oh,
Um, but yeah, I think that's the sad part. And that's like your dad was so amazing. Like all those phone conversations, I guess I'm jumping around, but that he was able to call and, talk to his siblings, I mean, your sister who finally called him dad or pops at the very end. I mean, I was crying. That was so beautiful. And how
yeah.
lucky that he could do that before he died. Not,
Exactly. And as you know, since you read the book, I mean, he wanted to share that he felt such at peace and such gratitude to be able to, end his life in that manner with just no strings hanging out there. Um, he didn't have a perfect life by any means, and there were, issues along the way, but at least when it was time to go, he was just at fully at peace and accepted that. Yeah, it was a real gift. Absolutely.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, I look at that and I look at my dad's. I mean, that to
Mm,
me,
yeah.
such a juxtaposition, and
Yep.
yet they both wanted the same thing.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's why, we're doing, I think what we're doing now is give people that opportunity, right? Through education, through advocacy, because we saw the impact on our parents, both now with, your father, he had a bad death, right? Your mom had a good death. My mother, she died from pancreatic cancer and she died under hospice care. And naturally, though I think there was a little bit of assistance of morphine at the end. So both my parents died in peace and had that, I'd say beautiful experience. I was able to be there by their side in both cases. But as you well know, and as you experienced with your father, that's not, the case all the time, or even probably the majority of the time. So that's, I think, why we're doing what we're doing. Um, so if you can talk a little bit about, I don't want to, shortchange your experience with your mother, but then how you then became interested. Did you immediately after returning from Switzerland decide? I mean, that's what happened to me. Within probably a month or so of me returning, because I had attended the World Federation Right to Die Society's semi-annual conference that happened to be in Toronto. And when I attended that primarily just, I thought, well, this is too much of a coincidence not to go. It's a mile from my house. And I'd just come back from, experiencing the Time with Dignity experience with my father. And during that conference is when I realized there's a real need for education and advocacy. So at that point, I committed. I want to, advocate. I want to help share the word, and that's what turned these musings and writings into eventually the book. But for you, something similar, or how did you make that?
Say it took longer. I will laugh and say that I was signed up. I was supposed to go to the World Federation conference in Toronto, but spent a week hiking on the East Coast with my sister prior to that and got COVID.
Oh,
And the
no,
morning that I was supposed to fly to Toronto, I was coughing. My sister was about to have a surgery, and I just took the test. And it's like, I took it 3 times. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I have COVID. I can't go and be with all these people at a conference." So I didn't go. Um, no, it didn't hit me on my way home. I did at some point reach out to Hemlock Society, and they had a Hemlock 101 Zoom call or something, talking about options. And in the chat, I just said, "Oh, I took my mom to Switzerland." And Faye Gersh, who is the most amazing woman, just a legacy. I mean, everybody knows who she is in the Right to Die movement. She's amazing. And she reached out to me and she goes, "Would you come talk to me?" So I had lunch with her. I did a whole hour, thing on my mom. And she immediately signed me up to be on Hemlock's board.
can you you and I know the society, but for any of our viewers or listeners that aren't aware of
The
what,
World Right to Die.
well, no, the Hemlock Society
Oh,
of
the Hemlock
of
Society. So, yeah.
yeah.
So, the Hemlock Society is an organization. It's 39 years old. It was part of, so the Hemlock Society of San Diego. It was part of a very much larger organization that then morphed into other things and actually morphed into either Final Exit Network or Compassion and Choices. But the only Hemlock Society chapter that's around is the Hemlock Society of San Diego. And we are predominantly right now an educational place. So we do programs on the end of life choices, but not just, the ones that you think of: medical aid in dying, voluntary stopping eating and drinking, inert gas. But we also do things like, uh, how to write your advanced healthcare directive. We also do things with, what are some up and coming things that people might want to try? What do you do with your body after you die? Psychedelics, do they help you? So it's pretty much around, fully encompassing dying and how to die better. Because really, the more you know, th- then the more you're going to have the death that you want. And I really don't care. I mean, neither does Hemlock Society. You know, do you want to just die in your sleep? Which is what I want to go to sleep and never wake up. Um, but do you want to live as long as possible? Or is it quality of life that matters? And it doesn't really matter as long as you're doing what you want.
And
And
I think so much of, once again, what we're doing, or I think I'll speak for myself, what I'm trying to do is, break the taboo about talking about dying and death, shatter that taboo, because so much of it is a need for the conversation within families, within couples. And to your point, whether at the end of the day someone decides to proceed in some manner of a good death or a end of life choice or not, just the discussions. And as you just pointed out, some of those discussions splinter off to advanced directives, medical care, wills, just putting everything in place and having those discussions. Because I think one of the worst things that somebody can do or burden on a family is put them in a really difficult place if the person is debilitated by disease or injury, and now someone else has to make decisions for them, and they've never had those discussions. Oh my goodness, I couldn't imagine being in that situation. And that's, my father had the medical directive, and we've had those conversations. I personally have had conversations, with my wife, and we have all that set up. But a lot of people don't, and so it is, I think, vitally important to break those taboos, shatter that, people having those discussions. So it's, yeah, totally support what Hemlock Society, and, we haven't even talked about, your organization, A Better Exit, yet. I think
we'll
it's
get
really
there.
important to get it out there.
So I have two comments, if I may.
Sure, please.
Um, Advanced healthcare directives. Like most people, believe it or not, don't have them. And I'm yipping at my kids who are in their 20s or early 30s to get one in place. And of course, they roll their eyes. But what I have learned so much is I remember my first advanced healthcare directive, my attorney wrote it up. I'm not even sure I ever told the person who was my healthcare proxy that they were my healthcare proxy. And I
Right.
certainly never discussed what I wanted. I was in my 30s or 40s. I'm invincible. But I think even for people that are that young, or I'll just even pick on myself, I'm 66. I'm in perfect health. I'm a pretty good athlete. I, plan on living for at least another 10 or 20 years. I think my advanced healthcare directive would be a little different. I mean, mine's pretty long and in depth. But really, right now, what's important is what's if it's in a car accident? If it's an
Exactly.
emergency. Like if I get diagnosed with Alzheimer's or something else, then redo yours and focus on that. But where I'm also headed is I was at a funeral with my ex husband almost 2 years ago now. And, you somehow end up talking about death at a funeral, right? It seems appropriate.
Unavoidable. Yep.
And he looked at me with his husband next to him and said, you're my healthcare proxy. And I was like, excuse me? Me? And he's like, yeah. So that was in January. And he didn't listen to me. He's an ex husband. I mean, we get along great, but he's an ex husband. It was our son who finally was like, Dad, you need to give mom that document because she can't help you without that document.
Right.
And then you could have blown me over when I got the document. It was 5 years old. Like, what good would that have done if he'd been laying in a hospital? I never in a million years would have thought that I had any right or responsibility to make any decisions on his part. So I think that's a huge, huge lesson. I mean, I tell everybody, I know I had my mom's in the cloud so I could access it on my cell phone wherever we went. If we ended up going to the hospital or a doctor, I could go up and just say, I am our healthcare proxy. Where would you like me to email these documents? And they were so appreciative. They were like, "I can't believe you have them." I'm like, "Yeah, they're right here. I need you to have them so you can talk to me."
So smart.
But that's probably like my biggest takeaway. But I also then want to segue. In the Washington Post yesterday, I'm going to totally butcher this, but a Dr. Raya Edafel Kirbeck wrote a editorial in the paper, and I'm going to just quote one sentence of it because the title was "We Plan Our Funerals, but the act of dying is what needs attention." And what she said is the most powerful thing many of us can do is also one of the hardest. Tell the people we love what makes life worth living, what matters most to us, and where we draw the line when life is no longer worth enduring.
Wow, powerful.
Isn't it?
Yeah, that's and that it's a great quote. And I was having a conversation the last episode with Chris Palmer, who is involved in Final Exit Network. He's written a bunch of books, but including Achieving a Good Death. And the conversation partly that we had talked about, a good life, right? And so even having these conversations as a 25-year-old or a 30-year-old, I think it helps remind us all that how precious life is. And maybe it's just a little bit to remind us that, yeah, live life to the maximum. Even if you're 25 years old and think you're bulletproof, maybe you're not. So there's so many different corollaries and so many different aspects to, I think, having these conversations out in the open and talking about them and getting these documents done. But
Yeah.
so talk a little bit about A Better Exit and how I think you were founder or co-founder of that. And what does that
Um,
organization do?
I was a founder, so and that actually sort of trickled through the Hemlock Society. One of our members called, and I was told, "Hey, go talk to him." But so we're an advocacy group in California because we all feel through different stories, we all have gotten to the point where, yes, we're very appreciative that California has a medical aid in dying law. It's our End of Life Option Act. Um, but, in it's so limited. Like, hallelujah, if you have cancer. Because had we had that when my dad died, he would have qualified. He would have opted for that option. Um, but if you have anything else, it's not really going to help you. And the sad part is that over polls that have gone nationwide, at least 70% of the population just agrees that, this is an autonomy, just like abortion's autonomy. You should have the right to choose. Having the right does not necessarily mean that you need to do it, but you have that option. Um,
I just want
yet,
to, sorry to interrupt, but from my perspective, I think abortion is different in the sense that at least I try to put myself in the mind of someone that's opposing it. And what I come up with the distinction between abortion and end of life choice is abortion is at least you're saying, well, I'm trying to protect a fetus or a person that can't protect themselves. But that argument completely falls on its face in the end of dying or dying with dignity scenario because it's the person themselves that is making their choice in their life. So I do think there are some corollaries, but I think there's an important distinction. And so I find it really difficult. And I wanted to talk a little bit about opposition. We can do that later, but the argument against when you're trying to project onto others. But sorry, I cut you off as you were talking about the legislation or the End of Life Act, Options Act in California.
that's okay because I laughed when you said the thing about abortion because I said, well, I guess I could say exactly what you said. So,
Yeah, yeah,
you're not crazy.
yeah. Thank you. And in fact, the act wasn't there an attempt a couple of years ago to try to supplement it and make it stronger, and it failed. Am I correct in
Yes.
that?
So that was us.
Yeah,
Um, we really wanted a law that closely resembled Canada's, where you're living.
yeah.
They have an incredibly fair, open to a lot of people law, and you've got your pros and cons, but it was too advanced for California's politicians.
And I'll just step in and just to describe. So in Canada, which is one of the most progressive around the world, made laws. Initially, they had it. You had to be your death had to be reasonably foreseeable. So they didn't have a necessarily like a 6 month like a lot of the states do, but it essentially was more or less 6 months by de facto. But then they adopted and modified, and they call it track two, whereas your life does not have to be, or your death does not have to be reasonably foreseeable, but there's a higher criteria to meet for that in intolerable suffering, and you need two doctors, and so there are safeguards for that. Now in Canada, so I'm on the Dying with Dignity Canada committee and advocacy committee, and we're trying to expand now to allow mental illness as one of the sole criteria, as well as advance requests. And those are just facing a lot of uphill challenges as well, similar to, I'm sure, the same arguments for California, just trying to expand its current roles.
Yeah. And it's interesting that you bring that up. So that's great. Um, we can compare Canada and California very easily. Um, we have pretty much the same population. Our medical aid and dying laws both went into effect in 2016. So we've had them for the same amount of time. Um, but exactly the way, you alluded, Canada is much broader. So in California, for example, in 2023, because this is the year I have the figures for, only 0.3% of the deaths in California were from medical aid and dying, as opposed to in Canada, 4.7% of the deaths of that year were in medical aid and dying. And if we're going to go, I could also say for Switzerland, who would be another country that's very open about this, where we all go to die. Um, Theirs was somewhere about 2% something, so between 2 and 3% of the deaths. So opening it up to people like this, it's just a matter of choice. It still takes a very determined individual. There's still a lot of safeguards. In the United States, there has not been one successful lawsuit showing that there was any coercion. There's been no abuse of it that's documented and substantiated.
And I just
Um,
would like to interrupt and say that's saying something for litigious United States and California too, right? I mean, if there's not a successful lawsuit, that's got to say something because I'm sure that there's been a bunch filed. And I also, one other similarity between Canada and California, as you mentioned, is you said 75% support. Well, the polling in Canada is 80% of the population supports, MAID generally. So you have widespread support. We're trying to expand the rights even further. You're trying to even get to, I'd say, even a middle ground further in the
yeah.
difficulty.
And then one of the things we would like to see, because, when I talk about California, you guys remember all the states are almost all the same in their laws, and they all follow Oregon's, which came to be in 1997. And the only way that they could agree upon and pass the law, like when do you qualify? They're like, oh, well, let's do it when you qualify for hospice, which is how they came up with the 6 months or less to live. Um, but no state, because the largest right to die organization, who very nicely gets these laws passed in a lot of other states, is not willing to push the envelope any more than what it already has. It wants to get this same law in at least 50% of our states before they will even remotely consider adding to it and making it more palliative, as far as I'm concerned. Um, but one thing I wanted to say that Canada has, um, the doctor actually injects the medicine.
Right.
We're There's no way that would get passed in the United States. But what we're asking for is a self-administered, like you do in Switzerland. Let the doctor put or the nurse put the IV in, and then have the patient themselves administer the medication. In countries like Canada and Switzerland, where you have both options available, Probably 99% of the people choose for the IV option. It's much quicker. Uh, the medicine that you have to drink tastes horrible. You have to take anti vomit medicine before you even start drinking the cocktail. Um, and even that we get, pushed back on. So that was the other thing I wanted to say. So if there's anybody listening in California that agrees with us, please, please join a better exit. We need all the help we can get. Um, and this is a slog. Like, it's not going to happen next year. Thankfully, we have a few senators that really agree with what we're trying to do. But until we can get enough people to contact their California legislators, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and that's a good segue to my next question or next point, and that is within the medical industry or profession itself, there's not a consensus either. In fact, there's pushback. I was surprised when I attended that conference a few years ago to hear that the palliative care doctors, not everyone, but the majority of them were opposed to it as well, and they thought that that violated their Hippocratic oath of do no harm. And that if they can extend life or continue life for days versus weeks or months, they'll take that. So I was surprised. I know that's something, or I believe that's something that you're finding as well. The challenge is finding support within the profession, whether that be physicians, I don't know, maybe hospice. You tell me, is it hospice? Does that support? Are there other practitioners within the profession that hopefully you'd want to use as allies in furthering rights? But what's your experience in that capacity?
Well, I think part of it is part of the law lets the organization decide if they're going to support medical aid in dying. And a huge opponent is the Catholic Church.
Sure.
And a huge amount of, at least here in California, our hospital systems, especially in rural areas, are all Catholic based hospitals. You'll also get hospices, they make money the longer people are in them. So they're not going to volunteer it. So everybody, the higher ups can decide who gets, are we going to support medical aid or dying or not? And on one hand, I really agree with if you are against it, there's no reason as an individual you should have to support it. But in the medical industry, if there is something like that, that your, I'll just say hospital doesn't perform that, it's your duty as a doctor, the way I understand it, to give the patient that option and say, but I cannot do it, or that's not a part of my belief system, but go over here and they will help you. If we could even only get that so people know, oh, this doctor will perform it for me. Or I even have this option. Are you kidding me? That would even just be huge because only 25% of Californians even know we have this option, let alone
Wow.
how narrow it is.
Wow. Yeah. In Canada, there's a case going on in British Columbia that I think it's due to have a decision here this summer on the right to access, and it involves the Catholic Church that has stopped. And so I forgot what her ailment is, but the plaintiff is somebody that wanted to pursue MAID. It's fully legal in Canada, but because she was under the care of the Catholic Church organization, she was barred from that. So hopefully, I mean, we're hopeful that the court will make a decision that supports that, and that will significantly change the landscape here in Canada, because similar to the United States, there are a lot of healthcare systems, hospitals, nursing homes that are run by the Catholic Church. So we're reasonably optimistic or cautiously optimistic that we'll get a ruling here this summer on that. Uh, And what about you had mentioned the inert gas method? I'm familiar with VSED, voluntary stopping of eating and drinking. Obviously, any type of the medical assistance in dying, whether it's uh, in Switzerland or United States, the practitioners. But what's inert gas method? I'm not familiar with that.
So for people, I will say for Americans that don't qualify for medical aid in dying, who can't afford to go to Switzerland, for example, or can't actually make the trip or don't want to make the trip to Switzerland, Final Exit Network um, has the inert gas method, and you apply to them. You have to show them medical records, answer questions. You go through a couple different questions, people questioning you, asking you questions. Um, and assuming that you qualify, then they will actually send two guides out to you, and they're protected under our First Amendment that you can talk about things. You are allowed to commit suicide in the United States. That's not illegal. What is illegal is aiding somebody. So to physically aid, um, you cannot do that. But they will send two people to your house, to you. They will give you the list of items that you can order. Most of the stuff can be ordered via Amazon. Um, and they will walk you through how to put it together. And essentially, what it is, it's a tank up nitrogen, because the air that we breathe is 78% nitrogen. So you will be breathing in 98 or 99% nitrogen. You have a hood over your head. It's a turkey bag, plastic turkey bag that you get from baking turkeys. And they'll show you how to put it together and get the nitrogen coming up. And I have had that hood over my head. Um, I can't smell or taste any different because it tastes just like the air we're breathing now. I know somebody who says that it does taste/smell different for him. Um, but they will walk you through this. You'll put it on as a testing thing. And then the guides go away. And when you decide, okay, I'm ready, this is the day. If you want somebody there with you, the guides, they will come back. You can have your family there if you want, or some people have had a big party, like in the living room and then gone and just done this in private with the guides there in their bedroom. Um, it's You pass out, you become unconscious within 30 seconds to a minute. You die within 10 minutes. So it's very peaceful. Uh, there have been lawsuits, especially recently, against Final Exit Network, but they haven't gone anywhere because they really haven't broken the law. It is, however, there's a couple caveats. It does show up as suicide on your death certificate. And because the United States is so litigious, your family really does need to be on board with this. You cannot do this in private, and then, you know, not expect your kids or your spouse to blow up and not sue Final Exit Network. But all of this, I should say, Final Exit Network does for free. The only thing that you need to do is pay for the equipment, and that's maybe $500 max. So
I'll just get back to, talking about practitioners that may not support it, but at least give people information, right? Options, we find is very important as well. So I just want to talk about a little bit about coordination with other organizations, whether it be through a Better Exit or with the Hemlock Society San Diego. How much coordination is there with other states, if any, or other organizations?
I would say not a lot, and I think that's frustrating to a lot of people. It's almost like we're a lot of small independent organizations. We have the same goals. Um, I will say that when we reach out to other ones, End of Life Choices California, for example, does work with Hemlock Society, and I know they work with FEN. Um, so I'm not trying to say that people don't work, but we all have our own little niches. End of Life Choices California does a lot more, talking about medical aid in dying according to the California law, and they will actually send somebody out to be with somebody as they take that medication. The Hemlock Society of San Diego does not do that. We'll educate. So there's crossover, and yet we're not infringing on anybody. End of Life Choices California, the Hemlock Society. I get calls for people who want to go to Switzerland. They'll just say, okay, go talk to Christie. Uh, Final Exit Network has a different person that gets the calls for Switzerland. So, and then between us, um, something will come up and we'll, oh my gosh, did you know this? And I'll go like, oh, no, thanks a lot, Randy. I'll, remember this. Um, so there is cooperation that way, if that makes sense. Is that sort of what you wanted to know?
Yeah, and also more on the advocacy than education aspect. I don't think that I'm not hopeful that there's going to be any federal legislation anytime in the foreseeable future, or maybe in my lifetime, but hopefully, more states or more enhanced rights with the current states. And I think some of that can be done through coordination, even though, once again, it's different states. I think different strategies and maybe some momentum. So I'd like to, for myself, that's something I'd like to take on to see if there's more coordination. But that's just me. So um, it's been great speaking with you. I'd like to leave on a positive note. Is there any recent success you've had with it, with either Better Exit or just personally in this space?
Think just people are becoming more and more familiar with this, and it's in the news more. Um, it's going to happen. I really feel that we are going to be able to expand our laws. To the best of my knowledge, A Better Exit is the only organization in the entire United States that is trying to expand the current medical aid and dying laws. So we're sort of like solo out there trying to blaze a trail. And the people, they're just, I mean, I'm just a person. Like it's only, I guess, sort of like you, Dan, like only because I've experienced it, now it's become my passion. And I don't mind. I love talking to people about going to Switzerland or going through what your options are at end of life because I really feel that I'm doing something for somebody. I'm helping them in one of their worst times, like when they really need the education, they just need to talk to somebody. I'll have kids call me and say, my parent just told me they're going to Switzerland. Is that even legal? And to be able to just talk them through it, I really hope I'm helping um, in a time when people really need it. And so I look at Hemlock, Final Exit Network, helping people with Switzerland. That's all helping people now. A better exit and trying to make it so that people with neurodegenerative diseases who are currently excluded from our medical aid and dying, that's like in the future, like if that makes sense. So I don't know. Is that positive enough for you?
I think so. I think you're doing great work. And I do think, well, I know it's making a difference. And like you say, not just for today, but for tomorrow. So I look forward to our continued efforts, our continued coordination. Look forward to if we're able to attend, seminars together and definitely, staying in touch and furthering this movement along. So thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed the conversation. And maybe we can do this again in the future and have some more success stories.
So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Christy. Appreciate it.
No worries. Bye.